I'm sure you're constantly analyzing deals and, and people I'm sure are asking like, okay, what's my minimum cap rate that I should get? What should be my cash on cash return? What cash flow should I be looking for? And what's so interesting, I think, during the underwriting process that a lot of people forget is, again, when you're creating that buy box, and I'm sure you do this all the time, and it's something we do with our clients, is not everybody fits in the same box. And so I think for your listeners, I really challenge you, if this is your first time investing, to get so clear on what your goals are. And I'll give you kind of a perfect example of 3 kind of current clients that I'm working with. And one, their goals, high W-2 earners, want to take advantage of the short-term rental tax, benefits, all of that good stuff. But really the goal is they have young children and they want these properties to be basically their trusts, right? They want these to be equity growing properties that they're probably going to hold on to for the next 10 to 12 years. Now, the way I approach a property like that from a design standpoint is very, very different than a property that I approach from a cash flow standpoint. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when we're talking about what investments to make, when we put together an investment schedule, right? If anybody's done a cost seg, there's depreciation in, furniture and your water heater and your roof and all these different things. And so when we put together a plan, and I know that they're planning on, at least for the time being, holding on to that property for at least 10 years, our renovation schedule might look very different. We might not invest in as much in renovations day one because what's going to be trendy and sells in 10 years is going to look very different. And so, again, making sure that we're thinking about, are we going to spend $40,000 on renovations up front and then have to do another $40,000 in renovations to sell this place in, 10 years? Okay, what's the smart play there, right? Like, what do we need to cash flow today, but also really look at what are the things that are important. And so for a client like that, cash flow might actually not be as important, right, in the underwriting. And so when we look at properties and we look at numbers, we go, okay, cash flow might not be great, but this area's equity potential, huge. And I know you're holding on to this property for a good while. And if you want to do a HELOC, if you want to do, even in 5 years, you want to do an exchange, you're going to be able to pull out more money in that property than you are in one that's cash flowing. Now, flash forward to another client that I'm working with, and very different goals. Their goal is to replace their W-2 within the next 1 to 3 years with short-term rentals. And so for them, cash flow.
Yeah.
And so we look at, okay, how much money do we have now? Yes, we need there to be an equity upside in case they need to pull out money to acquire another property in a year, right? If they're doing this over the next few years, we kind of, again, need to look at everything as a whole. And you say, I have this amount in cash. What should I do? Should I buy a property that, is turnkey and that we know is cash flowing and just do a design refresh on it? And we know that we can kind of grow that, by doing a design refresh on average, we can revenue 22% year over year, right? Like those are our figures and our numbers. And so again, when we look at things like that, we go, okay, well, a turnkey property might be better for you with doing a design refresh because it's going to require less upfront cash. You can save more cash for another property down the road. Again, equity, maybe there's an equity play there depending on the area, but you can see how both of those conversations are so incredibly different. And
Yeah.
even our approach to design is different because, again, it goes back to if cash flow is king for you, I am doing a data deep dive into like comparable properties. Who's the best performing? Why are they the best performing? Not just looking at the top end numbers and, looking at data on AirDNA, being like, they have a hot tub. Check, we can have a hot tub.
Yeah.
No, it's like, who's traveling there? What's your guest avatar? Like, literally making it as like niche as possible so that we can go like, we know exactly who's booking this house. And anytime anybody who meets that kind of guest avatar is looking, they're booking ours, right? And so again, like it goes back and forth where I think this kind of idea of like one size fits all in short-term rentals is such a farce. Like it's just it's not true. And if you have somebody that you're working with or a contractor you're working with, whether it's on management, whether it's on design, again, anybody that you're working with, you want them to understand that. And I think that's something that's really important as you're going out into the world and hoping to build this business and thinking about acquisitions. Asking yourself those hard questions up front are going to set you up for such success down the road, because I've seen people get into properties, maybe we connected kind of later in the process. And I'm sure by your nodding of the head, you've
Yes.
probably had some similar
Totally.
experiences where they're telling me cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. And I'm looking at the numbers going,
Right.
we can try, like
Yeah.
we can try, but and again, and it's not just interest rates, and it's not just how much did you put down and how much are we putting into it. It's again having that strategy really sussed out day one, because we can help you take a look at a property and I can give you red flags if you're working on the acquisitions front and somebody says, I don't know, I think it's going to be, I can furnish that for $20,000. And I can look at a property and go, well, that's in the Poconos and there's no central air. And so every single room is going to need a mini split. And you just added $70,000 to your budget. So maybe that's not what we want to do, right? So yeah, like I said, it's such a fun industry. But again, I kind of challenge anybody listening to, like, if you're in that space right now thinking of acquisitions, ask yourself those questions, like what is important to you, and then work with professionals to be able to help you suss out again what that underwriting looks like and what that process can look like for you, so you can be the most successful in a way that means success to you and not to everybody else.
Yes. Yes, man. You are so speaking my language here. And I've had so many of those conversations with people who have already purchased. And it was based off of, where did Google tell me the most popular short-term rental destinations are?
Yeah.
That must mean that that's the best place to buy. So I'm going to buy a cabin in the Smokies because I heard of 10 other people doing that. So,
Yeah.
and then they're like, well, why is it not cash flowing the same way? And I'm like, well, it's probably never going to at this point. So,
Yeah.
but I think, to your point, like, I think it's so smart to look at that first, be clear on the goal, and then buy based on that. But I think most of my audience probably falls in the latter category that you're talking about. Obviously living off rentals kind of implies like cash flow and being able to live off your rental. So if that's the case, I know before we hopped on, you were saying like, you'll get the question of what's the best market to invest in. But if someone's shooting for cash flow, what do you feel like are some of the things that you would recommend looking at? Is maybe there's specific markets, maybe there's specific types of properties, or what's the direction you would start to point someone in?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and as you know, such a loaded question. So, so what I will say first and foremost, that has probably been one of the most shocking things about now being in this industry exclusively for the past 6 years is, so part of our business, we've kind of three legs of our business. So CoHo House started as a co-hosting firm. So when I left Airbnb, when it was COVID and the pandemic and things were wild, it was like the wild, wild west. Nobody knew what was going on, how travel was going to rebound, all of that good stuff. Being in Southern California, there were a lot of owners that kind of left, the area and needed help with their rentals. And that was where kind of I wanted to understand the host side of things. I had been on the design side. I'd been on the consulting side. I'd been on the Airbnb side. And I didn't fully understand the world of hosting. And so CoHo House, thus the name kind of started from co-hosting. And we very quickly grew that from 5 properties to 12, kind of in our first year that we were co-hosting. And as we started doing design and I started consulting with other design people in the industry, we realized that there are a lot of people in this world that want to expand their short-term rental business, and everybody, I feel like it's funny to share now. Most of our clients will set up their first Airbnb, their first short-term rental. And then they will go, I'm never doing that again. How do I never build another bunk bed in my life?
Exactly.
I almost got divorced. Like, again, I've heard it all, that they were just like, it was awful.
Yeah.
And, and so we laughed, and my husband at the time was getting out of a business that he had run for a long time. And I literally had a design client who was like, oh, I never plan on going to this property. This is an investment property. I'm busy. I never plan on stepping foot in this property. And we had never had that conversation about who was going to go and set up this property. And so I literally was like, we're kind of in panic mode. Can you take our tools? My husband's very handy, and we're both from kind of contractor, backgrounds. And I said, can you fly to Florida and go build a bunch of furniture? And this was 4 years ago now. And he now has traveled and set up over 100 short-term rentals across the country. He has it down to a science. It is like insanely impressive, and I want nothing to do with it, but it is where the third kind of leg of our business started, was out of this necessity of setting up short-term rentals. And I tell you all of that to say, the places I have sent my husband in this country, never would have guessed in a million years. And a lot of times it's other designers. He works with other designers. He works with individual owners. He works on our projects. He's not just doing our stuff. And so he'll get, individuals that, hey, we bought all this stuff, and now we're realizing, oh my gosh, it's all in a warehouse, and now I have to build furniture for a 5-bedroom house. And like, I have a full-time job, or I manage properties, and I don't have time to go and do this. And I say that because the places that he has gone have always surprised me. And sometimes it's markets I'm familiar with, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard, Hocking Hills is really hot right now, and Logan, Ohio is blowing up, and, that's great. And then there are some places where I go, really? That's where you're going? And we will check in with our clients, a year later, 6 months later, and they are cash flowing and they're extremely successful. And it's really, really interesting, because to the long and the short of your question, I think, is like, where's the next hot market, but also where does cash flow come into play? Now, cash flow, again, for me, very important to understand, again, how much money you're putting down, how much money you're going to have to put into it, and at what point are you breaking even with a property, right? You're going to see a lot of these like big time investors that are putting hundreds of thousands of dollars into properties, and their length of time to become cash flow positive, they have a longer runway, right? Because their funds, they're again investment companies. For the everyday individual, we really, when you look at a business, any other business, right? Any other business in the world, if you started it, you would be so stoked if you were cash flow positive after a year. Like that would, it's unheard of. Any other industry, you're like, you're going to lose money for the first 2 to 3 years of your business, hands down, right? Like this is just how business works a lot of the time. And so that runway though for short-term rentals, I think we kind of are a little like mean to ourselves sometimes to say like we have to be cash flow positive, including recouping my down payment and recouping my furniture costs and recouping all of this like within a year. Amazing. If that's your goal, where it's gonna be, but we can get there through again kind of strategic investment. And so I think you would probably say the same thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but really you're looking for places where you can get in on a property at a lower cash value, right? And so looking at properties that are in the $300,000 to $500,000 range, like I think is again, if you can find something in that range, there tends to be some play, right? There tends to be some play with equity. There's usually room for improvements. There's usually room for renovations. Again, kind of getting that like immediate equity, if you're doing like a refinance, right? Like year 1 or 2. So that's really important. So, and if you don't have a stomach for renovations, then again, you're probably going to be at the top end of that, number. And, again, I don't want people to get so hung up on like, is this exact location sexy? Is it like on the top list? Is it in the top like up and coming market? I'll give you an example. My husband went out, worked with another designer. My whole family is from West Virginia originally. West Virginia is beautiful. Do I think of West Virginia as like the top destination of where I'm traveling? No, not normally. Do I love going to West Virginia? Absolutely. And he went to a small town right outside of like Fayetteville, West Virginia. And it was a gorgeous house. Again, I was like, oh, like you get to go in the fall and it's a beautiful that time of year. And he's a California boy, so he was like stoked. He gets to see all the colors and, all of that stuff. And I had asked him, I said, I kind of know the area. My family's from about an hour away. What's there? Like why this is like a beautifully designed house. What's going on in this area? And I started asking around, and I actually reached out to my family because I said, hey, my family, they're big WVU fans. And so they're up there all the time. And so I was like, hey, like what's going on? And my uncle actually goes, oh, they just designated the area in New River Gorge as a national park.
Mm.
And it's whitewater rafting and it's outdoors and there's hiking trails and Fayetteville area is, really investing in the downtown, and there's some up and coming like restaurants and this, that, and the other. And again, mind you, this is somebody who like has family that lives there. And I didn't know any of this. And, as we started looking, I was like, oh, this is actually a really interesting market. And because of the national park designation, they're getting an increase of like something crazy, like 30% year over year of like new travelers.
Everyone that wants to visit all the national parks has to go there now.
Has to go there now because it's the newest national park.
That's right.